Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be discussing Love Israel, Support Palestine, an Israeli Story by Nir Avishai Cohen. The reason I'm smiling as I talk about this is because I've done a review on this book before on my main channel. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card. And it was not well received. Because obviously it has the word Love Israel in the book title, and there, at least one commenter said, I don't love Israel. I understand. And that's not the point. The point is this person is not necessarily writing for you. He's an Israeli, a serving officer in the IDF, and he is probably writing for his people, trying to talk to them. So leading with a line like Love Israel probably appeals to them. I don't think he was considering other audiences. So that said, I still think this is a valuable book for people to read, regardless, because you can't only hear Palestinian voices or international voices. You should hear from Israelis who've seen through the lies and are on the other side. They shouldn't be punished for how they grew up. They grew up with the lies, and at some point they figured out what the lies were, and they chose to act against their community, against their family in many ways. They should be applauded for their bravery, not punished for all of the other sins, some of which the sins they've confessed to publicly. So, with that said, since I've already done a review, I'm not going to redo that review. I'm happy with it, despite the fact that some of my watchers weren't. That's okay. I'm simply going to read a couple excerpts from the book to give you a taste of what he's writing about. I'll start here in the very beginning. We also went to the army to become men, part of the initiation ceremony into the masculine world of Israeli society. Certainly with kibbutzim and moshavim back then. We didn't deliberate, never doubted it. The more combat-oriented, the better. And yes, we enlisted because we believed we were going to defend our homeland, our beloved country, our settlements, and our families. We were the product of an entire system that brought us up to move forward, happy to do battle, whatever the cost. School, the youth movement, media, parents and friends, it was clear to all of them that the right thing to do was to join a combat unit. No one asked the serious questions they should have. No one doubted it. A female friend of mine contacted me a while ago and told me that her oldest son was about to finish high school and was contemplating whether he wanted to join the army. She and I are very closely aligned in our political views. She even offered her time to help me when I ran in the Meretz party's primaries. She asked me to meet with him, as maybe my perspective would help him make a decision, whatever it might be. We met, he and I with a coffee travel kit, in an unknown magical forest in the Golan Heights. As the water boiled on the burner, he told me about his deliberation, the same I and all my friends had had. He talked about the need for the state of Israel, but at the same time also mentioned the Palestinians' need to have their own state. He feared his military service would cause our neighbors anguish. He was afraid to be part of the military force that controlled a civilian population for no apparent reason. He talked about beautiful and humane values that he'd probably gained from his smart mother, values of equality and liberty. He talked about violations of human rights in the territories on a daily basis, by the same entity he was deliberating on joining. He already knew so much at his young age, knew how to make very astute observations. I felt like I was taking a class on the reality of how I should have acted. To think, doubt, and contemplate. I felt honored to sit with that young man. I never got a chance to know any 18-year-old from my environment growing up with such healthy thoughts. I didn't presume to solve his dilemma, and I certainly didn't encourage him to choose one way or another. But I did try to give him some perspective, from the distance of our 22-year age gap, telling him about my contemplations as to whether or not I should keep serving in the reserves. When the conversation with that smart and brave young man ended, I wondered to myself how such a discussion had never taken place in the society I'd grown up in. I mostly understood that the society I'd grown up in wasn't as liberal and open as I thought. My older brother proudly joined Sayeret Matkal and later made his way to Golani's elite unit, where he served as an officer and commanded a team of combat soldiers. The IDF was still deep in the Lebanon mud back then, and Yuval spent most of his time in the occupied territories of southern Lebanon, engaged in dangerous operations. I worried for him on a daily basis. Each ominous newscast announcing the deaths of soldiers in Lebanon would fill me with fear. I waited for him to get out of there and return home. I feared for his fate. My mother started her activity in the Four Mothers movement during Yuval's service. It was a social movement calling on the IDF to withdraw from Lebanon. On one hand, My older brother was fighting in Lebanon, while on the other, my mother was fighting like a lioness against the foolishness of him being there. Perhaps this is the best example of the home I grew up in. The most combat-oriented soldier possible on the one hand, fighting for peace and against unnecessary war on the other. Don't ask any questions was the main motive in joining the IDF. We joined the army because we have one country and we have to protect it. That's it, an unwavering fact. I regret that now. I think we have to ask questions, to doubt things. I believe 17 and 18-year-olds should have real and honest conversation with their parents about the military service that's right for them. It's certainly a complex conversation that takes nothing for granted. A healthy society is one that debates, talks about, and doubts everything. But we are a society that needs healing. It's clear to me that my doubt is an outcome of turning considerable parts of the Israeli Defense Force into the settlement's defense force. Israeli society has to ask itself hard-hitting questions as to where and why the blood of its sons and daughters is being spilled. A messianic, religious minority has been dragging us into this quagmire for the past 55 years, and we're seemingly following this minority like it's the Pied Piper of Hamelin, sending soldiers on eccentric missions, controlling our neighbors, oppressing them. A small and smart minority managed to build a false representation for Israeli society. They've managed to convince us that all the Palestinians want is to murder us. It's a propaganda machine of scare tactics that's been running here for years on high. We're constantly scared into thinking that any minute now missiles will be fired at Tel Aviv from some Palestinian settlement, and that it's not just because of the settlements, but because just as bad as scare tactics has happened here, a general feeling that there's no other option. We're convinced that we don't have a partner, there's no other option than maintaining the occupation, and we get used to this crazy notion as the years go by. We get used to the stench of controlling another people, get used to the reality of violence, of course we do, and maybe we even enjoy that set situation in which we're the victims, that same sensation that has followed us for so many years. It doesn't even matter that we have the strongest army in the Middle East, that our economy is strong, we'll forever be victims. Even the false myth that we're reaching out our hands in peace doesn't exist anymore, only the sense that we're all about to be murdered by the Palestinians. Our parents, the children of Holocaust survivors, were busy continuing their parents' ways, building up this country. More than that, they were busy building themselves back up, constructing their Israeli identities. My parents' generation took a wrong turn at some point, probably due to the trauma of the Holocaust, and sanctified Zionism along with portraying the Arabs as enemies, instead of sanctifying democracy and portraying the Arabs as our neighbors in this conflict. My parents' generation is one of post-trauma. There are many negative side effects to national post-trauma, and one of them is racism and xenophobia. Arab was a curse word when I was growing up in Almagor. It's still a curse word in many places around the country. They've made sure that we fear the foreign Arab, the one living in the village next door, and certainly the one living in Nablus or Jenin. The Arab is always mentioned negatively. Thief, lazy, terrorist, and other such negative stereotypes. We, the Jewish people who suffered terrible racism less than a century ago, have ourselves become a racist people. Xenophobia is deeply rooted within Israeli society. And I would pause for a moment here. It's not just rooted within Israeli society, it's rooted inside Talmudic Judaism. That's why I always try to push back when people want to separate Zionism from Judaism. I always ask people, where did the supremacist ideology come from? It didn't come from nowhere. It's inside Talmudic Judaism. Do some reading. If you'd like to learn more about other books like this one, consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing this content with people. It helps to get the message out there to more people. This is chapter 6 about Breaking the Silence, which is an organization in Israel that's joined by former IDF soldiers who are willing to talk about the crimes they've committed. During one of the breaks in the first week of my academic year, I came across a stand of the Breaking the Silence organization. I was fresh out of my nearly 2-month reserve service as part of Protective Edge, and mostly carrying baggage regarding that violent and useless operation that took place in Gaza. I heard about the organization, but didn't actually know it. I talked about it with a guy at the stand who proudly wore a black t-shirt with a prominent logo of the organization on it. After he told me a little about them, he asked me if I'd served in the territories. I told him I'm a company commander, a major in the reserves who just returned from an emergency recruitment. But this time I didn't serve in the territories, though I did back in 2000-2010. He asked me if I was willing to give a testimony to Breaking the Silence. I flinched at first. That kind of testimony sounded to me like treason, an action against the military. I said that I'd think about it, but I don't think I have anything to testify about since I never broke an order. I was a normative officer at Golani. He said it shouldn't be a problem and that he believes my testimony has value. After some thought, I felt I had to start doing something against the occupation, and this kind of testimony is definitely a contribution to the fight. As modest of a contribution as it is, it's certainly better than nothing. I agreed to testify and we scheduled an interview. I replayed events from my service in my head in the days before the interview, both from my regular service in Golani and the 2 operational stints I had in the territories in the reserves. A few days later, the 2 interviewers from Breaking the Silence arrived at my apartment. They were a few years younger than me, but seemed serious and professional. They introduced themselves, talked about their past as combatants in the IDF, and their role in the organization's testimony and research department. The conversation was recorded for transcribing. On one hand, I felt strange in that situation, especially since I was recorded. On the other hand, for the first time in my life, I felt I was starting to do something meaningful against the occupation. After so many years of serving in the territories, in missions I didn't believe in, here I was doing something as a civilian. I first told about my journey in the military and then about events I thought were problematic. I talked about the violent entries into Jenin to lay endless siege on the civilian population, about the unnecessary checkpoints, the special training task on that family at Baka Ash Sharkiya, the Nablus operation, the abusive Magav soldiers, and my relationships with the settlers as an officer. The fact that they're actually the real commanders. I talked for 3 hours, almost nonstop. There were obviously no secrets or sensitive information in my testimony, just what my routine as a combatant officer in the territories looked like. In hindsight, I understand that my testimony accentuated just how wrong our presence in the territories was wrong, in my view. The fact I could talk about my military service years after, about events that seemed completely normal back then, and suddenly seemed terrible and morally forbidden, was very significantly for me. While giving the testimony, I truly understood the importance of what Breaking the Silence is doing. Their purpose is to show the Israeli civilians what the reality looks like in the field, how much that reality is bad and has to be changed, because it cannot continue this way. I suddenly realized that I'd never even told these stories to my family and friends, and I guess it was the same for most of the people who served there. I understood how great the gap was between what I was doing there and what most Israeli citizens know and think. There's this common belief that the IDF is constantly fighting terrorists in the territories, and that's far from the truth. The IDF spends most of its time policing, practicing absolute control over Palestinian lives. Most of my military service has little to nothing to do with the security of the State of Israel. My military service in the territories was mainly about letting the settlers fulfill their ideology, that this is the land of our forefathers, and no matter how much Israeli or Palestinian blood will be spilled in its name. Furthermore, the settlements damage the country's security since their positions make it impossible to draw a firm border between the Palestinians and the State of Israel, allowing terror factors to enter the country and execute terror attacks. An army can best protect the country when there's a clear border between the parties, whether that border is a result of peace or war. The settlements created a situation in which no such border could be formed between the two people, putting the State of Israel in actual danger. Moreover, IDF soldiers' blood is spilled in vain in the name of these settlements. Many of our soldiers wouldn't have died had they not had to aimlessly patrol between settlements. Adding to that, the settlements are the true and probably the only barrier in the way of a peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinians, which is exactly the opposite of the false narrative that's been fed here in the media and the education system for the past 20 years. We're being lied to, saying the settlements protect the rest of the country. Most of the heads of the defense system who leave their posts admit this isn't at all the case, rather the other way around. The settlements damage the country's security. I felt relieved at the end of my testimony for Breaking the Silence. It was important for me to have my voice heard, and this was my first platform. A few weeks later, they called me and said my testimony was approved and went on the website anonymously as I'd requested. Why anonymously? I wasn't completely ready to be exposed yet. I feared the reaction of the people around me. I went on their website, which mostly has testimonies by soldiers like me, and looked for mine by rank and brigade. I was surprised to find out that only a small part of my testimony was published, less than a third. I called to ask them why most of my testimony was omitted, and their reply was surprising. They had no doubt I was reliable and honest, but they had a protocol for testimony releases, and within it, they had to cross-reference it with other testimonies, media, publications, and other means. Since it's been quite a few years, they had trouble finding evidence for some of my stories, and they'd rather not publish things that are not 100% sure are true. I was very impressed by their honest and professional work. 2 years later, in 2016, the Middle East Studies Department at Ben-Gurion University decided to award Breaking the Silence with the Berelson Prize. In an extreme and anti-democratic step, the president of the university, Rivka Karmi, decided to cancel this decision, claiming the organization is, quote, controversial. These were the days of Netanyahu's absolute reign, and the bad anti-democratic winds were starting to blow harder across the country. An alternative ceremony was held in response to the president's decision, where they awarded the organization with an alternative prize. I decided to go to that ceremony. It was important for me to show my support of the organization. The evening began with a lecture by the late author Amos Oz, and to be perfectly honest, this was the incentive I needed to go all the way to the southern capital. Amos Oz named a list of traitors from the Jewish people's history, meaning individuals, or at least some of them, who were referred to as traitors. He named among others the prophet Jeremiah, Herzl, Bielik, Abi Yehoshua, and of course Rabin and Peres. He went on to name traitors from other countries such as Churchill, Gorbachev, Emil Zola, Abraham Lincoln, and many other good people. So pause here, Abraham Lincoln, eyebrow raise. Different conversation, different channel. Amos Oz declared that he was happy to be called a traitor at the time, and that Breaking the Silence should also be proud of being called that. He was followed by the organization's then CEO, Yuli Novak, who gave a speech that in proper times and places would be taught at each school the following day. Her words were truer, more powerful than I'd heard before. Yuli didn't talk about the soldiers' testimonies. She talked against the occupation. Yuli talked about the courage of defying consensus, about cowardly politicians, those who support occupation, and support breaking the silence yet are afraid of the primaries. And I sat there on the steps, eyes glistening with tears, feeling somewhat pride about giving my testimony to the organization 2 years before, for my very humble contribution to the fight against the occupation. I think it was there I understood I wanted to be part of breaking the silence. So, 2 short excerpts from Nir Avishai Cohen. He mostly posts on social media in Hebrew, but I did tag him when I posted my original review. If you know Hebrew, I think he'll be able to communicate with you. I do think he speaks some English. Obviously, this is a translation of the original. If you'd like to get a copy, I'll put a link in the description if I can find one. I'm not sure that I can find one because it's self-published. But if I can find one, there'll be a link in the description. It's a way you can support this channel. You can also support our channel for free by hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with people who'd like to hear Israeli perspectives of people who do not believe in the occupation, who do not believe in the settlements. There are such voices, and they need to be heard. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, consider using PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, they're below. Below that, Patreon and YouTube membership. These are ways that you can support me on an ongoing basis. You can get early access to videos like this one, chat with me behind the scenes, as well as get access to videos that I don't put out to the general public. They're just for my members and patrons. If you'd like to sponsor a book in the future, my Amazon wish list is linked below. You'll find books, obviously, here for Palestinian issues, also books from my main channel, Stephen Heiner. Feel free to go check that out if you'd like. But if you buy a copy of the book, send it to me. I will do my best to review it in a timely manner, and it's a way for you to get a book out there that you are interested in reviewed. A reminder, as we move the channel towards monetization, a way that you can help us is by watching as many videos as you can. Once we get that monetization, we hope to donate 100% of our profits to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. They help children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. Obviously, Palestinian children. So you can help us get monetized by watching as many videos as you can. That moves up our hours watched, and that helps us get over our last hurdle to monetization. So please go check out their work. Consider donating to them directly, but otherwise you can help them indirectly by just watching and educating yourself with videos on this channel. Until next time, enjoy your reading.